p.m. Rachel, you have roll call?
I do.
All right. I believe we have no comments or correspondence or public appearances. So I'm looking for reading and approval of the 5/12/25 Finance Committee meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other questions or comments regarding those minutes? All right, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes are approved. Moving right into new business, item number 1, discussion with Baird regarding plan of finance for municipal debt. And will consider an appropriate motion for action.
Okay. Well, I think pretty much know everyone now. Actually, we've not met. I'm Kevin Mullen from Baird, and I've been working with the village for, probably 12, 15 years now.
Yep,
Roughly.
at least.
After that very brief introduction, I don't want to waste a lot of time because there's a lot of dense information that I want to go through, and I will say that it's very numbers heavy, but I think I've laid it out here that we can like kind of walk through the pieces, and then I want you to ask questions. We've met with the administrative team here to discuss what potential capital project needs are. The reason the timing of the capital projects needs is now is because we also know that come October we need to refinance 2 interim pieces of debt that were done. One was done for TID 4 for some construction costs, and one was done for TID 3. Those are coming due. We always knew that that was going to be the case. We wanted to get some development in both of those TIDs before taking those out and locking them in for their long-term rate. So that's the timing that kind of has precipitated a lot of this conversation. The other piece is that you're in your early stages of budget cycle, starting to talk about what needs are in terms of capital projects. So if you turn to the first page here, here's a summary of the pieces of borrowing that we're considering, and they're broken down in 2 different ways. So across the top, we have tax exempt borrowing and taxable borrowing. So some of the projects are for public purposes. They don't accrue any private benefit, or private benefit, I guess is the best way to describe it. And so those pieces will qualify for tax exempt financing, slightly lower interest rate than those pieces that have a private bent to them, which are considered taxable, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So on the general fund side, there are 4 projects that we would be considering for levy supported debt, meaning they would actually hit the budget and be part of the budget that is tax levy supported. So Village Hall, there's a $300,000 project, fire engine $750,000, Buena Park Road $450,000, and library HVAC roof improvements. Those total on the tax exempt side roughly $2,250,000. We also have some water sewer supported projects, the lateral and lines for Main Street, $1.4 million. So those would be part of the budgets for both the water and sewer utility, and the debt service payments it's intended, those would be built into the both of those rate structures. Then we have TID 3 and TID 4. So TID 3, we touched on that there's a need to refinance the interim loan. That roughly is $3.6 million after contributions from the TID.
That was construction of Orbit and Gravity and 6th Street Extension, which is Spanky's and basically the whole side of it.
Now, I'm sure there's this burning question in the back of your mind, why is that taxable as opposed to tax exempt? Basically because much of those projects, much of the work that was done there, there are developer agreements that secure payment for some of the work that's been done there. And so anytime there's, that's almost like a private loan in essence for those improvements, because we're asking a private individual to do something. If they don't do something, they're going to pay back, their cost of that loan. And so that guarantee necessitates the taxable borrowing. So that amount is roughly $3.6 million. We've also included $3 million for improvements on Highway 12 in TID 3. So we'll talk about this in more detail. The reason that cost,
Main Street.
East Main
Street.
There's,
It was, yeah.
there's no Highway 12. This is
Main,
Main
let's
Street.
call it Main Street,
Yeah.
sure, okay, good to know.
It might have been
I
initially.
made a note here already.
Okay. So Main Street reconstruction. Now that is, in, the area where it's eligible for TID reimbursement. If there's an insufficient increment to pay that amount back, that would ultimately then fall back to the general roll for reimbursement. So it's a cost that could be TID eligible or, reimbursed through TID. But it was generally intended, I think originally, probably to be a levy supported project. So that is $3 million, and because that's a public project, that's in the tax exempt line. TID 4, we similarly have an interim loan, $3,530,000 that would be needed to refinance that loan and lock that in. So that's on the taxable borrowing side. Again, same reason as the other taxable loan. There are development agreements in place there and private partnerships that enter into that.
You reach up behind you, grab that phone and push it all the way down.
So that's $3,530,000. Then within TID 4, there's $1 million for pedestrian and bridge improvements, I believe.
Behind Village Hall, the fire station one. That's what Ted Bridge we've talked about for forever.
And so that is a public improvement that would be eligible for tax exempt financing. And then there's $1 million for firehouse remodeling and into an incubator space. And that, because it would likely have a private component to it, we would be leasing it back to private parties, would necessitate it to be potentially a public or a private use. So that's included in the taxable side. Does that make general sense? All right. So what I wanted to do then was to break these out into pieces. And so, please, I'm asking for patience as I walk through this because it's a lot of numbers, but I think it's really important. And break those out in terms of how they get paid back and how those buckets fall. So if you turn over the page, we're going to start with what is levy supported. So I mentioned the $7,650,000. Well, if you were to take all the tax exempt pieces and add them together, they equate to $7,650,000. So we estimated what that would look like for taking that out the full 20-year term that we can with that loan. And so those payments in aggregate are in that white box, both principal and interest. However, they each have a component part, and we wanted to separate those into their component parts. So let me start with the utility project in the light blue. You'll see that payment is roughly $110,000 top to bottom. So that's level debt service for the $1.4 million that is utility projects. That's the easiest one. Then we layered in the TID 3 projects. The TID 3 projects that are tax exempt really are just the Main Street pieces. So that $3 million is structured as basically interest alone through 2040, and then 5 level payments from 2041 through 45. So of course you may ask why that is. The TID goes out to the year 2040. So at the end of 2040, that TID expires. If there is excess increment between now and 2040, we can use that to pay that loan down before the last 5 years when it's anticipated that it would hit the levy rules. So it's a way for us to know what increment is available to buy that down.
So I want to shoot in here for just a second
You
to
bet.
talk about strategies for how to get the most bang for your buck. So the state sets it up in such a fashion that anything that could be TID eligible, that there might be some potential for repay back, you should make it a TID expense. And things like inflation in the value of real estate will help to generate increment that we don't have today. Kevin's going to get into his pro forma a little bit later to talk about the inflation rate for the real estate that's there. We also don't know what total development we will get in the pro forma makes some assumptions. So I want to be really clear on this, in that there may be a point years down the road that we have to use levy to pay for some of these projects. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So we're gonna revisit that a couple times. TID 4, those project costs, it's generally level debt service on in the first few years, and then it ramps up a little bit beginning in 2030. So in 2030, we're hopeful that, you know, there will be some additional development that occurs at that point in time. However, you know, what's projected, what we can see, you know, knock on, probably isn't sufficient to cover all of these projects at this point in time. So similar to TID 3, TID 4 may have some levy supported need in the future. So that is not as, you know, heavily back weighted as the $3 million one, but it does step up in the year 2030, and you'll notice that there. So if you take those three pieces away, we structured the levy piece in a way. So if you were to add the levy to your existing debt service that is levy supported, to kind of target a thoughtful net levy, assuming that TID and utility pieces cover their project costs. So, you know, our levy last year for net debt service was roughly $717,000. Now, Zeke had mentioned to me that what you actually levied is slightly less than that, because you use impact fees annually to buy down that debt service piece as well. But we wanted to target that at roughly the same level for the next 2 years, and then find an equilibrium years 2028 through 34. So it would drop down under this scenario and then drop down a little bit again in 2034 to 35. Recognizing though that in those periods of time, you may want to levy more because the TID 3 or TID 4 increments might not be there to cover it. And then this hypothetical fund balance applied. So in the first 2 years, if we didn't use some of your existing funds on hand to, you know, buy that down, just the interest alone on the levy supported projects would bring you above that 717. So in 2026 and 2027, there would be a little bit of fund balance that would be applied to ease that in, and that's roughly 270. So does that make sense? All right, let's flip the page. The two taxable pieces, you know, right now, those are also structured in a way, level debt service on both of those to be TID supported. Pretty straightforward on both of those, and those, you know, kind of roll back to the original pro formas that were developed for those TIDs. So, you know, 3.6 for TID 3 and 4.5 for TID 4. That 4.5, that $4.5 million does include the $1 million investment in the firehouse for the incubator. All right. So we talked about what that net levy debt service looks like. You know, starting at 717, dropping to 520, dropping to $400,000 on the last schedule. I wanted to give you a sense as to what it looks like, assuming none of the increment that we've identified, or only the increment that we've identified, comes to fruition based on our current assumptions. So, you know, another way of saying that is I wanted to show you what the TID exposure looks like potentially rolling onto the levy. So, assuming your net debt service with the projects we described on the prior page, and then adding potential advances from TID 3 and potential advances from TID 4. So you'll see that combined potential levy impact after 2030 goes from roughly $700,000 up to $9 million, up to $1.2 million, and plateaus at about $1.7 million annually. So that would be, you know, a significant increase above where you're at right now. But it's important to know that, you know, increment in TID 3 and TID 4 would be available excess increment to buy that down. Those pieces make sense? Okay, so let's see, page 6. Page 6 is the breakout of TID number 3. And so I'm gonna
One more,
do,
let's go.
sure, do this at a high level.
Oh, yeah.
I'm well, thanks, how are you? So at a high level, the way that TIF works is, any increment that's created after, any development that's created after the start of the TIF is considered, additional increment to pay back that TIF. TID 3 started with a base value of $11 million, and it's presently got a value of $70 million. So the difference between 11 and 70 million, that $59 million is increment. Taxes on that $59 million are what we use next year to pay debt service in that TID. So it's based on your current tax rate and that value. And that, when I say your current tax rate, that's both school districts, the county, the technical college, and the village all combined together to get that $15.93 on that value. New values are going to be coming out in a couple of weeks here. So we'll know what the updated value for 25 is shortly. But we've assumed under column C, and this is the important one, that this year there's going to be an additional $6 million of new increment in TID 3. And then you can see beginning in 2026, 12 million, 17 million, 9, 9, and 7. So a total of $62 million of new value in that increment based on what we know right now. So that includes Newman Homes, roughly.
Newman Homes is 50 million. I
And
think
so
yours is
40,
47.
42 million is what we have in here for Newman Homes, and then we have like 20 million for other things that are not Newman Homes in that TID. Just to give you a sense. Now those are all estimates, but using that on the right-hand side, column H, that's the total revenue then that's created in that TIF. And that's the annual amount using those assumptions that would be available. So turning the page, if we add in, take those revenues, add in our existing debt service, plus under column K, those are obligations or promises that we've got with developers, some of our development agreements. Those are those estimated payments to the developers. And then the two new borrowings. So the 3.6 million taxable and 3 million tax exempt. You add all of those together plus the annual expenses of the TID to get your combined TID expenses. You can see based on that, beginning in 2034, the TID would be a little bit short, and it would continue to be short from 2034 through 2040. Also want to point out that there's in yellow, $3 million of principal that is kind of pushed up into that last year on the tax exempt piece. As I mentioned before, that actually represents 5 payments, annual payments after 2040, but that's the last year of the TID. So that's the last year you'd have increment. So using this pro forma, we would still be shy that payment, right? So you'd have annual payments, subsidies to the TID beginning in 2035, and then in that year, that would be the last year you could contribute to that $3 million expense using TID funds. It would then roll to the general fund. Now, if you saw this coming, in 2030, you're in 2030 or 31, and you realize that the TID is kind of, plateaued, and there's no prospect for additional development, you're probably going to do something to smooth that out. You're probably going to start to levy more in anticipation of that reality, knowing you don't want to necessarily have that big, balloon or, those big payments come due if you can avoid them. That's a summary of TID 3. Questions on that? All right, TID 4. Apologies again. The size of we're saving paper, and the size of the font got smaller. So here, same methodology. Current base value is 8.3 million. we've got $16 million in value, so, you know, an increment of 8. And then we factored in $1.5 million of new value in 28 and $2 million of new value in 2032. So that's the only new increment coming into this. With the refinancing and the additional $2 million of new projects, you can see that that TIF, with these assumptions, starts to need subsidy really after 2027. And you know, most of that principal is not coming due until 2031, so there's not a lot of restructuring that can be done here. It's really whether or not the increment is there. So there's probably a better than average chance that you're going to need to subsidize, at least initially, in TID 4. That annual balance is roughly what that subsidy looks like in the current situation. And it doesn't really, you know, get using these assumptions back to, you know, positive until 2045. And that's primarily because we're putting $2 million of new cost in, and we're only assuming $2.5 million of new stuff. So that's the reason for that.
So this is not showing the residential lease back, so it sort of assumes that we're gonna lease the fire station for the next 20 years at $0, right, which is not the case. So this is just looking at TID increment income.
Correct. So one of the assumptions that we're making is that the investment rate, so what you're earning on the TID balances when you don't have them or don't need them, is 1.5%. That's, you know, I think in the current market, low. We're also assuming annual growth or annual inflation of 1%. So that inflation can take two forms. It's property value, real property growth of 1%, or growth in the tax rate of 1%. But you're probably going to have both.
Speaking of the fire station, at this point, it's part of the increment, because we're getting taxes on it.
No. You weren't getting taxes on it from me, right?
Because it's sold and it's on the tax roll.
No, because it wasn't paying taxes.
Because he didn't pay. Well, we'll get it eventually, but it's
Oh,
on
so
the
it
tax
has
roll.
been sold.
It's on the tax roll.
It cleared back to us. The village reacquired that parcel.
So,
Yes, sir.
So anyway, I think, you know, maybe now is not a bad time to go back to, you know, just to look at that summary page here, page 5. And so your net debt service, which is the levy supported piece over on the left, you know, you can kind of eyeball what that looks like if you were to add the TID 4 increment to it. Similarly, TID 3 as well, you know, just to get a sense as to what that, you know, general exposure looks like. But the reason that I've got the yellow shading between 2041 and 2045 on that TID 3 column is because those payments would be outside the life of TID 3. So those payments actually, we know if there was an increment, those would be scheduled to hit the levy. So a lot of information, I know.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've got questions, thoughts, but I wanted to hopefully lay it out in a way that, you know, can give you a good way to start to think about it and structure it. And then the last thing I'll mention is I did include a schedule of what happens moving forward, if you're moving forward with the financing. I'll start at the back. We know we need the funds for the refinancing by October. So we're going to be doing a portion of the financing. We would like to have the village board take action on it in September, early September. So it gives us a little bit of time to think about it. But we really want to start getting information pulled together and out to Bond Council, Disclosure Council, and mostly the rating agencies. So we're in a position to hit the market early in September to close by October. So, you know, a lot of those conversations would have to occur between now and the beginning of August in terms of what this looks like, you know, if there are ideas different than what we're talking about right now. So really mid-August.
Okay. Anything else, Zeke, you want to add to that at the moment?
No, sir.
Any questions quickly that came across, Linda or Andy?
I did have a question. Why do we need $450,000 for Boyden Park? I thought that's getting done by a grant. Town.
No, so the town is doing the work. We are paying the town for a portion of the roadway that is our responsibility.
Yeah.
So it's just joint contracting. It's not, you know, they're paying for our stuff.
When's that supposed to be done? Perhaps you would have that.
Initially before school started, but I think
so
maybe Halloween.
And this fire engine, is this the ladder truck?
No. So
What's up with our fire truck?
This has to do with ISO ratings. So your frontline engine has got to be 10 years or less older. Your present engine is approximately 8 years old. If you order one right now, it'll take 2.5, 3 years to get one delivered.
But we just got that.
You got that before I got here.
18.
Yeah, I've been here. You got it delivered in 18. You ordered it, I think, in 16 or 17. That was pre-Zeke.
Time is moving on.
It was.
Any other questions, Andy, or
Um,
process? We discuss it
I've
on
got
the
one
road.
other one with fire engine. That's you bought a fire engine based on a contract for service you had with the town. If you were to design an engine today, and this is coming from Rosie and Rick and several others that I've talked to, you wouldn't design as expensive of an engine. So what I've got factored in there is an engine on the lower end, and what I've talked to Rosie about is a stock engine, not a custom engine. So this is going to come up for conversation. How much chrome do you want to put on it? Where are the bells and whistles? We've got a water system here. We need an engine that throws water. We need to hold that one as our backup. That's still a good engine. We just won't get the full ISO points for it. If we let that mature out, and also hold the ladder.
Okay. Zeke, what motion are you looking for out of this committee today, if any?
A recommendation on the village board as part of the 2026 budget process, and when we get to a parameters resolution to
Bring it
adopt a
back.
parameters resolution as such. There's a lot of pro forma work that I need to go do
Yeah.
after today's meeting around some of these, in particular the fire station.
Okay. So then, we're gonna look for that motion to recommend to the village board to continue the process on, and when we have something to come back to this committee, it'll come back to the committee.
So moved.
Second. I don't think we
Right.
can.
Yeah, currently, yep. We have a motion and a second. Any other debate, conversation, questions on that motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Did everybody have a chance to review the 2025 financials in the packet? Excuse me?
So one more time.
I asked if they had a chance to review the 2025 financials. I know you do daily, so,
Briefly.
okay. I just, for, you know, if there's any questions now, we can dive into it. If there's any questions as you look at them again, we can discuss at that point.
I'm gonna bring up a few.
Yeah, I figured you would. I just wanted
Yeah,
to.
so first of all, just in glancing through your investment accounts, your delivered rate continues to decline. Our maturities are over a 3-year period, depending on which investment account we're talking about. Last year we were able to achieve 5.15, 5.3% on your returns. This year we're 4.1, 4.2. So the interest rate environment has continued to
Yeah.
be less productive. So your investment income is down just a little bit. You're still doing better than what we did 5 years ago. So that's positive. Other things that I'll bring up, and I'm just going to hit really high level stuff. Give me a second to get a page number for you. page 71.
Oh, I only got 59.
Okay.
Wrong one then.
Alright, so 70 and 71, I'm gonna start with some good news, and that is, EMS run revenue, is probably gonna trend higher, substantially more so than what was budgeted, so if the trend holds, we'll pick up, possibly an extra $100,000 in revenue, and just the run volume has been steady, and we've been on top of billing. The other piece of it is collections. We changed billing companies a few years ago, and as we stay consistent with getting billings out, the collection rate also goes up. So if you stay on top of the money, right, it just is easier to manage. So again, if all things hold the same, we may roughly double what we had budgeted for collections. So those are both real positives. Just don't count our chickens before they hatch. With that said, you've still got a substantial deficit driven largely by EMS operations. So your EMS operations, if we factored it all together, somewhere in the ballpark of $500,000 in deficit. And while those offsets will help, those are not final. So Fund 75, which is interfacilities revenue, you brought in $0 to date on that. We've taken some steps to address that with the EMS department, let them know, hey, when we're working on budget this year, we are looking at elimination of some full-time positions, elimination of some part-time positions. If we can't get on top of the priorities and deliver what was delivered with 2 full-timers roughly 3 years ago by Chief Mueller, which is $360,000 a year. We have 8 full-timers right now. We can't manage to deliver a single dollar. That's a challenge, and it's a leadership thing across the entire organization. They are working on. They're putting some steps in place to make some progress. So the budget draft that we'll be putting forward this year will show some positions eliminated because that's the path that we're on right now. And reevaluate as we get into fall. If we've begun to pick up in the facilities, then we can possibly postpone that.
Why aren't you getting in our facilities?
My candid answer would be that there's a mythos that unless there's 4 people over there 24/7, 365, that the effort shouldn't be made to go out and garner those. That's a false myth. Again, we did it with 2 full-timers 3 years ago. There's no reason we can't go do that. We consistently have got 4 people or 5 people available on day shift to go out and do whatever run would come up. We've been able to pretty consistently field 2 ambulances on day shift. And on weekends and nights, we've been able to do callbacks and again field that second ambulance. I think it's a cultural thing, Andy. I think if you ask people, even when Mueller was here, Mueller had some challenges with it, and Tom and Nick Birmingham and Mueller would kind of coach with it. Are you telling me you know everything there is to know about patient care? Have you had every kind of patient contact? You're an expert now, and so no, this is a good learning opportunity, and we should take it as such and make sure that we're documenting patients appropriately and assessing patients appropriately. It's not glorious. It's a cancer room. It's a very sick patient in the back of an ambulance. You're making small talk with them. It's not fun. It's not glorious. It's not glamorous. So this is the single biggest thing that I would like this committee to be aware of, going through the budget process, in part because as we talk about all the borrowings, I'm gonna have to go through an S&P and ratings call. Last year when I went through that call, they asked, why do you have a deficit? And I explained to them that we had some challenges within our fire and our EMS departments, and that we were working on a plan. At this point, I need to be able to tell them we have a plan and we're working to implement that plan. So what I'm discussing with you right now is the plan. Either we are going to deliver interfacilities revenue or we are going to need to make some cuts.
And or leadership changes too,
Sure.
which will help achieve
Sure.
what we're
On the
trying to
revenue
achieve on the revenue side.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, any other questions or anything regarding the current financials?
Those are the big ones.
All right, if there are none, and if there ever are any, you can reach out, obviously, to me, to Zeke, or we can chat anytime. If there's none now, then I'm just looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Rachel.
I'll note it down. Okay, so we had a motion to adjourn in a second. Any other questions or anything anybody's got on their mind? All right, quickly before we adjourn, I apologize I did not inform you of the passing of Todd Solbrowski, who was on this committee. Just publicly want to thank him for the service that he provided. He was a great asset to the committee and the community. On behalf of this committee and the village board, we sent his wife Ann and family a plant for his service, and she did send a card back thanking all of us, and that he would come home from these meetings and speak highly of this group, that she wanted me to share that with you guys. So we will miss Todd and thank him for his service, and hopefully tonight in the village board meeting there will be an appointment and approval of Mac Easy for this committee, so we will not be tight on numbers going forward. So with that, all in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
All right, thank you guys for coming.